Pearl Harbor, a name that, when spoken, evokes sorrow, outrage, and a deep sense of disbelief. It wasn't just an attack on a naval base. It was a betrayal of trust, a brutal blow amid what felt like a peaceful morning. That morning in Pearl Harbor, where massive warships lay anchored, became a moment no one in the U.S. Navy would ever forget. There were no warning drums, no early signs, only squadrons of aircraft slicing through the blue sky, laden with ammunition. Life changed in an instant. One moment, the sailors were eating breakfast, laughing with comrades, maybe writing letters to loved ones. The next, sirens, fire, explosions tearing through metal and men alike, when the bombs began to fall. Everything descended into chaos. This wasn't a conventional battle, it was a declaration of war delivered through smoke, fire, and the voiceless screams of men trapped in the ocean's grip. Black clouds rose from the harbor like terrible omens. The air was filled with deafening roars, the engines of Japanese planes, the thunder of anti-aircraft guns, the cries of the wounded. Some sailors still fought back. Some rushed into the flames to save their comrades. Others returned fire under a rain of bombs, driven by a final instinct to resist. These weren't fictional heroes. They were real people, alive, afraid, and choosing to stand firm amid the mayhem. In the face of overwhelming odds. Their courage became a quiet, defiant roar. The ships that sank carried more than steel and firepower, they carried the pride of a nation. And as they slipped beneath the surface, something inside the American spirit stirred. On the decks of burning battleships, a new resolve was forged. Smoke-stained faces looked skyward not with despair, but with a growing fury. The Japanese made a fatal error in thinking that a surprise strike would break America's will. What they awakened was a slumbering beast, and it did not rise quietly. It rose with fury. From the ashes of that harbor, a new fire burned within the hearts of millions. From that day on, the United States would never be the same. The call to war wasn't just met with fear, it was answered with rage. The people united, not simply to survive, but to retaliate. And they did, with unprecedented determination. In factories across the country, workers doubled their efforts. Planes were built. Ammunition loaded. Soldiers trained. The machine of war roared to life. Pearl Harbor wasn't an end. It was the beginning. It altered the momentum of war, redirected the course of history. And most of all, it engraved into the world's memory that violence as a wake-up call carries the highest cost. Every December, Americans remember the fallen. But it's not just names etched into memorials. It's a collective memory of bravery, sacrifice, and the cruel cost of underestimating a nation's spirit. Tourists still visit the memorial above the USS Arizona, where oil still rises from the sunken hull like tears from the deep. In classrooms, in documentaries, and in the quiet reflections of veterans, the story is told again and again. Because Pearl Harbor is more than a battle, it's a warning. That peace must be guarded. That freedom comes at a price. And that history, once ignored, can return with terrible vengeance. The attack on Pearl Harbor wasn't just an event. It was a story of awakening, of the historical lessons humanity must never forget. And as long as waves lap against the shores of Hawaii, that story will live on, not just in books or speeches, but in the hearts of those who carry the torch of remembrance forward. For out of fire, sometimes, a nation finds its voice. And at Pearl Harbor, the United States found not only its fury, but its unity, its resolve, and its unshakable purpose. But with purpose came a path paved in blood. The consequences of Pearl Harbor echoed across continents. Almost overnight, the United States transformed from a hesitant observer to a full-throated participant in the Second World War. The sleeping giant was now fully awake, and its first steps were thunderous. The Pacific Theater became the focus of a relentless campaign. The Battle of Midway followed, a clash of carriers that would shift the balance of power in the Pacific. Then came the brutal island-hopping strategy, Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, each a name soaked in sacrifice. These were not distant skirmishes, they were brutal, unforgiving battles that tested every ounce of resolve. Across the Atlantic, America joined forces with the Allies in North Africa, in the skies over Europe, and eventually on the beaches of Normandy. Pearl Harbor had not just awakened fury, it had bound the nation to a global mission. The war would stretch every limit, industrial, emotional, moral. Cities were bombed. Soldiers marched and fell. But the tide was turning. Japan, once confident in its ability to shock and dominate, now found itself on the defensive. The empire that had dared to strike first was being pushed back, inch by bloody inch. And it all began at Pearl Harbor, where the match had been lit. In the end, Pearl Harbor didn't just bring war. It brought unity to a fractured world. It shaped alliances. It forged international cooperation. And though the war that followed was devastating beyond words, it taught a lesson that still stands, that peace, once shattered, can only be reclaimed through extraordinary courage. The harbor still holds its ghosts. But it also holds the echoes of a nation's resolve, and the first heartbeat of victory.